and also those that are listening to the proceedings online via their live broadcast. I will now take a roll call to confirm attendees of committee members only, please, and to confirm that the meeting is correct. Can committee members please respond when called? Councillor Adams.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Ahmed.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Bamra.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Gourmez.
Yeah. Present, Chair.
Councillor Hatfield.
Yeah, present, Chair.
Councillor Jairanjan.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Littlewood.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Nolan.
Present, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Noor.
Present, Chair. Thank you.
I also note the attendance of Cabinet members Councillor Norman, Councillor Santos and Councillor Coombe. I will now confirm officer attendance. I will confirm officer attendance before each item. For following management of the meeting, attendees' microphones are muted. If members wish to speak, please raise your hand or use the raised hand button, which I will see. You may also use the chat function, but please be aware I won't be monitoring this, but I believe Michael, the scrutiny officer, will be looking at this and alerting when somebody's got their hand or comment or want to speak. It is anticipated that the meeting will run smoothly with requests to speak before being directed through me, and I reserve the right to mute, warn or remove any attendees if required. If anyone loses connection during the meeting, please attempt to rejoin using the calendar invitation you will have received. If you wish to dial in, you may wish to put 141 before your number to ensure privacy. Declaration of interest. For this item, I am required to remind all members to declare any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest they or their spouse or partner may have in any matter that is to be considered at this meeting. 3. Public participation. As far as I know, there are no registered speakers tonight. Report of the agenda item 4. Report of previous meeting held on 31st of March 2021, pages 1 to 5. First of all, can I just confirm the accuracy of the meetings? Any comments on the accuracy? Any comments? So there are a number of actions from the previous meeting, and I've been advised that actions 1 and 3 to 5 will be delivered in a single update paper to be circulated to members. Is that agreed? Yeah?
Thank
Okay,
you.
Great, thank you. COVID-19 pandemic update. Adrian, are you on the line?
I'm indeed, Chair.
Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, and I'll seek to share my screen if that's okay, so I can bring the presentation up.
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay. Can I just check that people can see that?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So just to start with the impact of COVID in Redbridge as of the 25th of April. Sadly, 729 deaths from COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. That's within 28 days of positive test, and it's 858 deaths where COVID is referenced on people's death certificates. And we now have a total of 32,823 confirmed cases of COVID since the start of the pandemic. I've provided the case rate as at the time of writing, but I can provide an update on that. I think as of yesterday, our COVID rate was 21.6 per 100,000. So obviously that's down in a week. Although I would urge some caution around those figures. The rate is now low, and therefore it only takes a relatively small number of cases to generate what appears to be quite a significant increase in the case rate. So the case rate becomes less effective as a measure as it gets lower. But clearly, the fact it is low is good news, and the rate of positivity from community testing continues to be low. And we are now the 14th highest infection rate in London. And we continue to be in a situation where no ward has a case rate above 60 per 100,000. So overall, comparatively positive news with respect of the ongoing trends. And testing, as said at previous meetings, we have good coverage in respect of general testing. Probably the biggest development since the last meeting is that we are now surge testing again. This is in the IG1 and the IG6 postcode areas following the identification of 3 variants of concern. We have to do 12,500 tests overall. I think Gladys was telling me that as of this morning, we'd done 4,500 of those tests, and we're expected to conclude testing by the end of next Friday, but we're hoping we might be able to do it a bit earlier than that. It's probably worth emphasising that really this testing is being undertaken as a surveillance measure rather than an infection control measure. It's to determine the extent to which those variants might or might not be prevalent in the local population. And of course, what we might well see is an increase in the overall case rate in those areas simply because we are doing far more proactive testing than would be normally done. And that was very much the experience of the testing that we did in the IG1 area, and we're following the same methodology with a mixture of test kits being delivered to people's doors, and we're collecting those tests as well. That seems to have been a very successful way of distributing test kits, but equally there is the option where people can either go to a fixed site for a test or a mobile site for a test, and we have done an awful lot of communications in those local areas, really encouraging people to take up the testing offer. With regard to vaccination, overall, I think we are on, generally pleasing figures. These figures are slightly different to the figures presented to the last committee. That's simply because there's been some sort of changes in the methodology around counting, and essentially, I think we've now got a more stable basis for counting vaccination rates. So these are the figures which we will use going forward. The target that the NHS is setting is 90% across each of the age groups. So you can see that we are there in respect of the 80+ age group, and obviously further to go as we go down the age range. Overall, our performance continues to be comparatively high for East London, and I would say that we won't just stop at 90%. Clearly, ideally, we want 100% of people to be vaccinated, and we'll continue to sort of think about how we best do that. I think, as everybody is aware now, I think at the time of writing, it was the case that residents aged 42 and over were being called for vaccination. As I said, our take-up rates continue to be comparatively high, and I think we've got a good coverage of opportunities and locations where people can go for their vaccination. Our GPs, as we said at last meeting, been doing some sterling work in respect of providing pop-up vaccination sites at places of worship. And again, another development since the last meeting, that we now have our vaccination bus is in operation. That's targeting the mosques during Ramadan and has been very successful. I think as of Monday, with the over 600 vaccinations had taken place around the bus, and I know certainly GP colleagues are very pleased with the level of interest and the level of, I suppose, in-reach into local communities that the bus is having. It's quite obviously it's quite high profile provision, and people seem to be really responding well to the presence of the bus in their community with regard to being vaccinated. I think it's fair to say the national supply of vaccine continues to be a little bit lumpy. We had a couple of issues last week which were resolved, but so overall, I think at the moment we're not hitting major issues around supply impacting on demand. But where that is the case, then the priority will always be given to ensuring that people have access to the second dose. So overall, I think the vaccination effort locally is going well. And then with regard to supporting local communities, we have stood down the public-facing aspects of our wellbeing service. The wellbeing service is still there, but the level of contact to the service has been reducing over time, and shielding arrangements have obviously been paused nationally. So now the calls go to the council's contact centre, and they are passed on to the wellbeing service if the wellbeing service intervention is required. And similarly, as a council, we have stood down our engagement activity in the street and moving that resource to enforcement as the lockdown restrictions are lifted. In adult services, we're starting to see a pickup in demand for services returning to pre-COVID levels. I think we do have obviously concerns around the impact of the pandemic on people's mental health. I think there are also some signs, certainly across London and perhaps locally, that, for example, quite clearly people in the early stages of dementia, that dementia might not have been diagnosed during the lockdown period. So we do expect to see quite an increase in demand over the next few months in adult services. And obviously, as family members return from furlough and go to work, they might well have been caring for individuals in their family, and therefore those families might need more support from adult social care. And I think, as I said at the last meeting, we continue to have concerns around the fragility of the care market and the provision both locally and nationally. Supporting schools, all of our schools are open as reported last meeting, and it continues to be the case that essentially schools are well practiced in managing testing requirements and the required safety measures. The reopening did go smoothly. The attendance of pupils at school is returning to pre-pandemic levels. We're currently at 93.4%, which is reasonable. We'd like to see it a couple of percentage points higher, but I think where we are in respect to the return to schools, I'm encouraged by that figure. And we continue to have a low level of positive tests cases in school. We're at the moment, I think at the time of writing, we had about 115 pupils isolating, and that was partly the figure of quite a large number from one school, which is being followed up with the school concerned. The COVID winter grants that I talked to the committee about previously, we had news that that's now been extended. So that will allow us to fund free school meal provision during the May half term, as well as continuing the financial support that we are providing to individual families. And there does get a sense that government is extending that grant every time it sort of realises that there's a school holiday approaching. And we will make best use of that funding. For care providers, we continue to provide an awful lot of advice and support. Probably the issue that we are grappling with at the moment is the relatively low level of take-up of the vaccine. There is the caveat around data quality, certainly where we've followed up with our providers with the lowest level of take-up of vaccination. We've often found that they have been underreporting activity, but currently we're seeing about 69% of care home staff vaccinated and 62% of domiciliary care staff. That is too low, in my view. The government is consulting on making vaccination mandatory for all staff working in care homes. That consultation, I think, is just closed. I think the government is intent on making that a reality. That might well have an impact on the workforce that we will obviously need to consider. And we will and are continue our efforts to improve the take-up of vaccination in staff. I strongly suspect that what we might be seeing is what we might see as the age range for the vaccination drops. This isn't a issue that's specific to staff in care homes. It's probably more an issue that is specific to the general population, and it's just being reflected in the care home staff first. Having said that, there are some signs that the initial resistance to vaccination is reducing, and staff who were reluctant to be vaccinated, some of those are coming forward, and we will continue to work with our social care providers to improve that vaccination take up. And I think I said at the last meeting, we've also have further infection control funding for our homes, and the rate of outbreaks in our homes continues to be very low. Children and Young People Services, we do have a concern around activity. You will see from the graph, the grey line, and the significant increase in activity in the number of referrals coming to social care in March. That is largely the result of schools returning and disclosures being made by children and young people. Obviously, with the timing of Easter, it's very difficult at the moment for us to know whether that constitutes an ongoing trend or that's just the immediate spike in demand and things will settle down as they did during the first lockdown, after the first lockdown period. But it is a concern to see that level of increase. It is not entirely unexpected, and information that we saw a couple of weeks ago from the police in respect of domestic violence reporting showed a very similar spike. So there seems to be there is a correlation between domestic violence incidents reported as well and resulting in referrals into social care. But we are also seeing more disclosures from children now that the schools are back. Overall, our performance continues to be good. We are largely hitting our targets around timeliness and coverage of children's social care, but our capacity is very stretched, and we are looking at options to make the best use of the capacity that we have. For example, looking at admin tasks that might be moved to other groups of staff to free up social worker time. And as in adults, mental health continues to be a major concern. There is a system-wide conversation with our health colleagues happening, I hope, next week to talk around how we respond to this issue, because this isn't just a matter of additional resources in child and adolescent mental health services or CAMS, if there just simply aren't the people to recruit into those services. So we need to, as a system, to think hard about how we respond to what is some very worrying levels of mental health concerns amongst children and young people that we're seeing at the moment. Our educational psychologists have done some excellent work with schools to support children and young people's mental health. But there continues to be, as I said, a very high level of demand. And equally, just to make the committee aware, we do have an increasing number of children in court proceedings at the moment. That's partly the result of increased activity. So this is children where essentially we're going into court, most often for them to be accommodated by the local authority. But it also reflects just the impact of the pandemic on the court process. So things have slowed down. So we just have more children, more families in that court process than we would do normally, which is again causing us capacity issues, and obviously having to think hard about how we best safeguard those children whilst decisions are made about their long-term future in the court arena. The current priorities are pretty much as we reported to the committee at its last meeting. Clearly, we want to continue to support the vaccination programme and encourage take-up. And as the slide says, particularly in respect of those groups and communities where take-up levels might be low. We are continuing to look at arrangements for testing and contact tracing. Obviously, the return of international travel and holidays causes some concerns around variants of concern and the impact that might have. And I suspect that we will see an increased role for local authorities in testing and contact tracing as we see those travel restrictions being lifted. We continue to work closely with the NHS to ensure that their systems are working and that people can access the medical treatment that might have been delayed during the pandemic period. And as we said previously, we are concerned around the gaps in outcomes that the COVID has exacerbated, particularly for those households that live in more economically deprived circumstances. So we know we had issues in respect of health, educational and economic gaps, and COVID has exacerbated that, and our focus is on how we best support those communities to resolve those gaps. I've talked about the response to increasing activity in children's social care. And I think, as I said previously to the committee, we've got a lot of staff that have been working flat out for a very long period of time. And it's also ensuring that we support them appropriately over the next few months, because in many ways, whilst the medical aspects of the pandemic are, hopefully the situation is improving, we're starting to see the longer term impact of the pandemic in relation to, for example, our social care services. So, Chair, I will stop sharing at that point. And I'm happy to take any comments or questions you might have.
Thank you, Adrian. That was really, really interesting and very in-depth. We were one of the boroughs in the national news recently about the COVID variant. I'm just interested in how the surge testing is going, and if you've got any early indications as to what it is showing us now at this moment in time.
Gladys popped up on my screen just as the question finished, so I'll pass straight over to Gladys.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. It's a little bit early to say, but all what we know is in Redbridge, they're not linked to an outbreak or any cluster. So it's a bit really early to say. But like the other boroughs where they found them outbreaks in schools and nursing homes, care homes, we haven't found that. They're all very isolated cases.
Okay. The other thing I was very interested in, Adrian, you mentioned about the educational psychologist work. It may be useful for the committee to have maybe a presentation on the work that they're doing on in mental health.
Yes, absolutely.
In young people, I think that would be.
I do actually have a presentation and a briefing, so I can either send that round. Maybe if I send that round, and you can
please.
Take a view on whether you'd like people to attend to describe that work.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had Khalid Noor first, and then Ross and Bert, in that order.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to ask this question. Adrian, thank you very much for your presentation. I will always come with the slides. It's very helpful with lots of information. And the first question asked from the chair, one of the questions I want to ask on this regard, but I'm rephrasing the question for the different part. Is there any way, are you concerned about the surge testing that is we are at the moment to planning to do these things in the 2 different postcode? And the second question is, do you have any time limit that when you're expecting this testing to be completed? Thank you.
I think in respect of the concern, obviously we are doing surge testing because variants of concern have been identified in the borough, and we haven't, nationally we haven't been able to establish how those variants have arrived in the borough. So that is essentially why we're doing the surge testing, to find out whether there is a greater prevalence of that variant. I would say that when we obviously did the IG1 testing back in February, we found no further variants of concern within our surge testing. I don't know what we will find this time round, though I do think that it is likely that I would be very surprised if this is the last surge testing activity we undertake. I think this is going to become increasingly common, and it is probably, a good way for us to find out whether these variants are becoming established in our local communities, and then think what we do in response to that. The time limit is essentially we are looking to have those 12,500 done. Our target is to have it done by the 14th of May. Obviously, if we can get it done quicker than that, then we will try and do it quicker than that. I think at the moment we're absolutely on track, probably finishing a bit earlier. But having said that, we're in the easier stage at the moment. The later stages are going back to people who haven't answered the door, etc. So it's return visits. So the level of tests begins to fall away through the time period. But at the moment, we are definitely on track.
Thank you. Chair, can I ask another supplementary question if you allow me to?
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Adrian, thank you very much for the answer. In terms of those are not taking part in the COVID testing, the test testing, how are we monitoring this and how we ensure that everyone go to this test is because it's very important, as you mentioned. Thank you.
I think to be honest, our target is to get the number. So the number is based on the fact that we know that not everybody will take up the test, but essentially we want a large enough sample to give us some reliable information with regard to the prevalence or not of the test. So quite clearly we want everybody to take up the test, but then the number that we have and the area that we are covering allows for the fact that some people won't take up the test or we can't contact them. I don't know, Gladys, if you want to add anything.
No, that's correct. But just to make it very clear, we already have the universal testing offer. So regardless of where you live, whether you have symptoms or not, regardless, you can actually ask for tester, and that's really widely done. So at the moment, because they have identified a couple of these are the variant of concern with no travel history. If there was travel history, we would not be surge testing. What they're doing is they're genome sequencing a lot more to see whether there is any other cases in Redbridge. So there's underlying surveillance going on. So there's lots of issues that's being done. So if we sort of look at nationally, the more we surge test, we suppress the South African virus. So that's the whole purpose of surge testing. So it's not more virulent or more transmissible than the other variants. So it's really purely for surveillance, as Adrian has said.
Okay, Ross.
Thank you. I had two things. The first thing is I've just recently, literally a couple of days ago, had my first vaccine, my first dose of the vaccine. I will say it was very efficient, but I needed, obviously I work, so I needed an evening appointment. And the latest one I could get was 5:55, and that was at the Excel Centre. I have no issues with the Excel. It all worked like clockwork. Everything worked well. But I did look, and a lot of the slots did seem to be daytime slots. So I was just going to say, as we roll out to younger age groups, it is really very important that we do more evening slots, more capacity to reflect that people are working and won't be able to attend in the daytime. So I'm just hoping that that will be possible, because I'm going to get a vaccine, but a lot of people, if they saw, oh, I've got to trek to the Excel or anywhere, might not. The second thing with the surge testing, I note on my ward, Valentine's, the bit that is covered in the surge testing is the bit behind infiltration, with all the HMOs, with all the multiple occupancies, with all the flats. And as someone who knocks on a lot of doors, I know getting responses in that area is challenging, to say the least. So I just really want some reassurance that we are getting a reasonable take up in all the areas where there's surge testing, and that we haven't got gaps anywhere due to the makeup, the transient nature, the HMOs, and those sort of issues.
Gladys, do you want to pick up the surge testing and I'll?
Yeah, so we have got the what we call the outreach team that go and knock on doors. What they also do is if there is no answer, it's recorded, so people do go back. So we do try. We try not to, because we really want to target everyone. So because they have done testing from door to door for a while in our borough, so they're really quite well versed with it. So we have trained them to make sure they do go back, so that we don't miss.
I think in IG1 we were knocking on doors, I think 3 times, wasn't it, Gladys?
Exactly,
and again, trying to knock on doors at different times of the day. So there's no point constantly going back at 10 o'clock in the morning. But we'll try and vary it to give us the best chance of catching people while they're in. And I think on the vaccination point, Councillor Havel, I completely agree. And I know our health colleagues are looking and thinking about how the vaccination offer might well need to change as we go down through the age groups, and I know the focus is on essentially improving the accessibility, both in respect of time and location, for the vaccine, because we will need to take a different approach that's sort of recognised, or have a wider range of options and make it more locally accessible to people.
Bert?
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to have a look at the data. I mean, you mentioned the infection rate is still decreasing despite other variants found in the community and the surge testing. I just want to know if that's right, and do we have any indication of the vaccine take up as we go down the age groups, and do we anticipate any other future third waves later on in the year, and how big that might be?
Okay, I will definitely defer to Gladys on the future waves question.
Okay.
I'll just pick up the other questions around vaccination and take up and testing. As I said, I think we need to be a little bit cautious with regards to the rates, because whilst it's very positive that they are very low, that does mean that 4 or 5 positive tests and our rates appear to be going up 25%, but that's because they are so low to start with. The variants in concern at the moment aren't really registering. We're currently doing these 12,500 tests on the back of 3 identified variants in concern in the borough, but obviously in respect we are now doing 12,500 tests, and a significant majority of those will be for people who wouldn't otherwise not have been tested. So we might well pick up people who are asymptomatic with the virus, and therefore we might well expect our rate to go up in the areas that are tested, simply because we're doing more comprehensive testing. I think in IG1 what we didn't see is we didn't see a change in the positivity rate, so the level of tests that we did and the increase in the number of positive cases that are identified remain constant with the population that we were seeing in the general population, which was in itself quite reassuring. On vaccination, I think as the slide showed, we're at 90% for the over 80s, and then it sort of reduces from there. We need to take some caution, particularly in the sort of 40 to 50 age group, because that vaccination campaign is clearly very live at the moment. Not everybody who wants to take the be vaccinated will have had the opportunity to have the vaccine yet, or will have booked their visit. And we're also finding that, with the bus and the pop-up clinics, we are still seeing, new over 80s coming forward for vaccination, for example. So we will continue with our efforts to essentially encourage everybody to take up the vaccine. I think at the moment it's probably too early to use the figures to really come to any conclusion in respect of take up, although there is sort of growing level of body of evidence from various national and local surveys of attitudes towards vaccination that we are using in order to inform how we best encourage people to be vaccinated. And Gladys, would you like to use your crystal ball in respect to the third wave?
I mean, this is really based on modelling that's been done. So they do predict we will have a third wave by the end of August or September, but that is provided that is without the effect of the vaccines. So what they reckon is, I mean, all pandemics will have those waves, but it probably will be a lot lower. So it probably won't be the highest surge, but it's really, really important what we do now, especially with the vaccination and the surge testing, they will all help towards. So we are expecting, but provided it doesn't sort of really overwhelm our the hospitals, we should be able to manage. So that is with caution that we're preparing early for that.
Thank you. Any other member? We have the cabinet members. Cabinet members, do you wish to add anything? Elaine, Mark?
No, Chair, I've got nothing to add.
Just to say a huge thank you to the teams, and particularly around the surge testing. We've got a reputation across London now around our ability to do that and do it so well. I just want to pass on my thanks to Gladys, Adrian, and the team for that. Guys get calls at the weekend now from people who are starting their surge testing. Having to start their surge testing actually in the borough that I'm sitting in at the moment, in Tower Hamlets, but so just down the road. So yeah, no, huge thank you to the team.
Khalid, you've got.
Yes, Chair. Just to before we jump into the next item, today's iftar is 8:30. I'm just reminding you that whether you allow those that are fasting to take break for 10-15 minutes.
What time did you want to do that?
If you allow me to 8:25, would be better. 5 minutes before the iftar.
No,
Yes,
yes, of course,
so
we'll accommodate that.
Yeah, the
Thank you.
recommendation is we take 10 minutes break if that was required. So
Yes.
Thank
When we reach that time, Khalid, do remind us, yes?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Adrian, I'd just like to thank you and the team for all the hard work that you've done on this, and you know, well done. Really superb performance by your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We'll pass that on. Thank you.
Agenda item. Oh, so with the there's no actions. It's just to note the update. Agenda item 6, direct payments, outcomes for clients. I've got Leila Hussain talking on this. Leila, are you here? Yes, she's there. Leila. Adrian, can you help?
So
Chair,
Leila is here, and she's unlocked her speaker, but it clearly isn't coming through.
I know Leila has been bedeviled by broadband problems recently.
I'm here.
So
there we go.
Oh,
Yeah, she's here.
she's here. Okay. Welcome, Leila.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. I just had to click it on and off. I'm sorry. It could be my
That's
my
okay.
broadband
No worries.
problems. It usually happens when I put my video on for some reason. So I apologise for that. Thank you for inviting me today. Are in receipt of direct payments, and I have submitted a report really that is looking at whether there are any in achieving outcomes for people who receive the direct payment to those who have their care needs met through commissioned services. As you will note from the report, adult social care really doesn't have the resources to undertake its own research, which would be a size of commitment. There have gone upon some findings from 2 research projects that I think are actually going to have been very, very useful actually in drawing comparisons and perhaps from some of the conclusions that have been made. I've given you a brief overview about what they had. Also, at the end of the report, there's the Appendix 1. So it's with the 2 research findings. The first one was published in 2019, and it looked at whether direct payments improve outcomes for older people, and if there's a difference for people over the age of 75 who receive a direct payment to meet their needs rather than commissioned services. It involved over 300 respondents across 3 English counties. Interestingly, the fact that payment users appreciate that it translated very much for people, and that there was no real significant difference in outcomes compared to people who served a commissioned service. That's care and support that's arranged by the county.
Can I interrupt you? Unfortunately, the sound is really bad. I can't really understand. Is that what everyone else is experiencing?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Yes, we can't hear properly.
Shall I take over, Leila, and then hopefully yours might clear a bit for questions. Is that okay, Chair? Maybe if I.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful. Is that okay, Leila? I'm really sorry, but I'm not hearing a sentence clearly at all. I'm sorry. It's very broken. Adrian, do you want to
I'll
take
try
over?
to anyway, if you can't help.
I'll introduce the paper, Layla, and maybe if you can follow up on certainly the many questions that I probably won't be able to answer. So I think as Layla was saying, the report picks up on two pieces of research that have been done across local authorities, really exploring this sort of sense to which there is any differentiation with regard to outcomes for people who are on direct payments as opposed to commission services. I think that partly seeks to respond to what was essentially the general direction of travel, which was to encourage people onto direct payments with the view that people having greater choice and control and being able to essentially organise the care around their needs might produce better outcomes. I think it's fair to say that in both instances, the research found actually there wasn't an appreciable difference in outcomes for people who were on direct payments as opposed to commission services. And indeed, one of the reports says that actually, direct payments hadn't had the transformative impact that policymakers were looking for from them. And ultimately the direct payment is still based around a budget, and that budget is still fixed. So there are always some inhibitors in respect of the impact that direct payments would have, and quite clearly also raising issues around needing to be sure that direct payments were right for people and people could make informed choices within respect to direct payments. So I think the question that we were set by Scrutiny was around the outcomes for people who are on direct payments and people who are on commission services. As Layla was saying, to be brutally frank, we don't have the resources within the local authority to do that level of sort of research, but relying on these two pieces of research would say that, and there is no reason to think Redbridge is any different, that actually there isn't an appreciable difference in outcome for people depending on the two routes. I think though we would still take the view that if people want to be in control of their care, they want to decide how their care needs are best met, they should have that opportunity to do so. And that continues to be the approach that we sort of take within the local authority, to give people the option of a direct payment. And some people are keen to take that and other people less so. And we will continue to respect that choice. And the paper sort of just also goes through some of the things that we've been doing over the last, I suppose, couple of years, with Layla very much in the lead in respect of improving our arrangements around direct payments. I know Layla's been several times through governance and assurance to talk to them about direct payments processes and procedures, and a lot of work has been happening to get those improved and right. And quite clearly during the pandemic raised a host of issues and challenges for people direct payments. So the paper sets out some of the direct support that was provided to those people. I think the stats I saw were that our sort of level of direct payments had reduced during the pandemic. That's often because some people just resigned the care they were receiving full stop, and might well be receiving that care from family members and others during the pandemic period. So that might not be an ongoing trend, it might just be the result of the pandemic. So I think overall my interpretation of this report is we shouldn't claim that direct payments will have a transformative effect on people. The evidence isn't there for that, but equally it is really important, continues to be really important, that where people want to essentially take control of the care, they want to have a say in how their needs are best met. Essentially, direct payments provides a really good device for enabling people to be in that position. But equally, some people don't want to take on that responsibility, and therefore we will continue to provide commission services to them. And I'll pause at that point.
Thank you, Adrian. I thought the report was very in-depth, and it provided a lot of information. My question relates to the recipients of direct payments that lack capacity to consent. and therefore appoint a family member or a suitable person to manage the payments. And under safeguarding, it talks about the carers that are employed directly through this facility have enhanced DBS. I mean, has there been any monitoring? Do we know? Allowing the carers just to come have an enhanced DBS is not enough, especially if somebody lacks the capacity to understand what's happening. And if family and friend or whoever's managing this aren't at home, they're at work, how is it we're ensuring that the care is actually happening to the standard that we would hope it's happening?
We would normally pick that up through the review process. So obviously we do undertake reviews. I can't say hand on heart it is annually for everybody, but we would sort of prioritize reviews with the capacity that we have. So if, for example, we're in that situation, the review might well cover the role of the individual holding the direct payments and the support they're being provided. I don't have the information to hand, but I know we have, for example, cancelled direct payments in the past where we have become concerned around either blurring in relation to the caring responsibility and the financial management of the direct payments, or even, for example, where we've seen what we consider to be exploitative activity happening around that individual. So normally, as I said, we would rely on the review to pick up those sorts of issues, but also generally with regard to our safeguarding responsibilities, I think our teams are very alive to that risk around direct payments and exploitation.
And do we, sorry, just on that, do we actually go and see the individual who needs the care rather than the person that's managing the finance side of things? Do we actually look at the individual and make sure that, you know, they're looking as well as they should do? And you know,
we do, and I can see Layla's got her hand up, so I'll see if she's working, if it's working. Layla?
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, we
I
can.
still start sounding like a Dalek. Okay. Yes, it's absolutely one of our top priorities, even during the COVID pandemic, that we would actually go and visit any safeguarding, coming into account all of the COVID restrictions, and we certainly made sure that people were wearing PPE and the person was safe. But it's absolutely one of our top priorities to make sure that where it is necessary and appropriate, that we visit the recipient of a direct payment, and having to take that sensitive approach really, and being able to talk to them about actually whether their needs are being met, and indeed whether there's any concern about exploitation going on. It has to be said that most describing it under the Care Act, it tends to be family members, and the majority of time those are absolutely trustworthy. That's not to say that occasionally you do get misuse and abuse happening, but it's something that the social workers are very well versed in investigating.
Is it worth maybe sort of looking at doing some sort of case study work, i.e. talking to the recipients of direct payments and maybe trying to sort of look at the picture within Redbridge to see what's coming out of it? Actually, I appreciate that officers are going in and having those discussions, but it would be quite nice to be able to sort of know, categorically that yes, you cannot predict that somebody is likely to cut corners and not provide the care that the individual might need. I'm just sort of think that for scrutiny purposes, it would be quite helpful for us to have some sort of assurances that the service that we're you know, yes, direct payments, it empowers individuals, those that are capable. Absolutely, you know, I think it's people should have the freedom to be able to choose if they have the capabilities. But where my concern is where they lack that capacity, and somebody else is providing that, it might as well be the council that's providing it rather than another body. But having said that, you know, there are family members that, you know, it's their loved one and they will do their absolute best to provide the very best care, and we'll be looking out for that. But unfortunately, there will be some that fall through the cracks. So maybe, you know, that's a potential area of work that we might sort of look.
We will give that some thought, Chair, and maybe we can provide you with some sort of case studies in respect of, you know, issues that we've identified and what the response was.
Yeah.
Because that, I think that will illustrate,
Yeah.
because, you know, there is a range of behaviours that we see, and quite often it is just that some people haven't quite understood what the direct payment is for and what it's about, and things have got a bit blurred rather than direct exploitative behaviour. But we'll think about how we can provide some case studies to the committee around, as said, what we found and what action we've taken.
That would be really helpful. Ross, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I actually think this report is very, very interesting, because for years and years, I feel like we've been pushed about direct payments being wonderful. Now, everyone should go on direct payments and there's outcomes and more choice. And I've always been a bit dubious because, one, I've never felt there's enough money in the system to actually allow real choice when it basically only covers people's real care costs. And secondly, I always thought that as a council, if we commission services, we would have efficiencies of scale, and actually by going down the direct offer route, we were actually, you know, increasing cost of people, so reducing the service. And thirdly, I was always concerned about the amount of bureaucracy faced by sometimes quite vulnerable people or their families, as well as all the risks of exploitation. So I am quite interested to see that outcomes from direct payments are not always necessarily better than when we commission the services. So I just wondered whether going forward that would mean we as a council would take a slightly different approach, perhaps pushing direct payments less than we have done. You know, particularly where people don't really want the bureaucracy and hassle of dealing with and commissioning these services themselves.
I think personally, for me, as you've indicated, Councillor, clearly, you know, we need to be careful that we don't oversell direct payments as the answer to all issues and needs, because quite clearly it isn't, and it could never be the case. I think it, you know, equally there are some people that absolutely want to be in control of their care needs. So I think we will tend to see this more as an option for people to be considered as part of the care planning process. And essentially, you know, we will proceed accordingly. I don't think we have been, you know, very, very actively pushing people onto direct payments as local authority. Certainly not over the last few years. And you're absolutely right. Whether it's a commission service or a direct payment, there is a certain level of bureaucracy in this as well. And sometimes people decide that's not for us. We will not essentially push people towards a direct payment option when they give us that feedback. You know, we will essentially move them onto the commission service route. So I think we would essentially position this as an option that is available for people, and it's essentially for them to decide whether they think it's appropriate or not.
I was just going to add, if that's okay, Adrian, and so that, yeah, absolutely. Under the Care Act, there's actually a duty on local authorities to offer a direct payment if it's appropriate to do so. And again, there's that judgment call, really, again, from our frontline practitioners about what is appropriate, whether indeed the person is able to manage it. And in some cases, we do put in direct payments, and you're quite right about the bureaucracy involved and the reconciliation work that goes on with managing it. And sometimes people do change and are transferred over to commission services just simply because they can't manage it. But equally, we do have people and residents here who manage them very well and have families or friends who support them to manage it very well indeed. And they do feel that they're more in control. And certainly the research, particularly in the research example number 2, demonstrated really perhaps for younger adults who had a broader range of outcomes that they were trying to meet and didn't really want to be slotted into the confines of a commission service, somewhere where you wanted to be more dynamic in terms of how your needs were being met. It kind of helps that particular group of people, perhaps in mental health and learning disability, certainly to meet their needs.
And I think I would add, just to pick on Layla's point, in my experience, I think it's fair to say our frontline practitioners share a certain level of skepticism around some of the wilder claims around direct payments. So I don't think that they are extremely enthusiastic about moving everybody onto direct payments, in my experience.
Thank you. Jay Ranjan, Councillor Jay Ranjan.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether my question been answered already. I was 2 minutes away from my computer. Anyway, my question is, Chair, according to the report on page 18.3.2.2, direct payments offer no advantage in terms of outcomes for the service user over council commission care. Then why direct payments seems to be so popular with the service user?
I think it is just that, that option that people can feel in control of their care needs. Essentially, they have the choice around how those needs are met. But what it doesn't do is provide an appreciable difference in relation to the impact of the services that the individual has put in place as opposed to a commission service. But I think a lot of people want to feel in control of their lives, and essentially a direct payment does that, which is why some people want to take that option as opposed to taking a council commission service.
And perhaps I would add as well, the point that you quite rightly have pointed out was the research that particularly focused on older aged adults over the age of 75, where perhaps the broad range of outcomes, well, it wasn't as broad as perhaps younger adults, where there was a tendency really to really be looking at personal care rather than a broad range of activities. So that particular report, as you quite rightly point out, didn't see any significant difference in terms of outcomes, but it was particularly that older age grouping, whereas the second research report did say there were some benefits, particularly for the younger aged adults, in terms of being in control and having the flexibilities about the types of care that was being purchased.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. I think part of my question has been already explained by Adrian. It is in terms of direct payment, we have seen the fear of the unknown. A lot of the people usually are afraid to take it up, knowing that when they understand they have got a lot of financial budgeting and other things to do, and that actually scares off a lot of the people. But actually, when explained to them the greater independence side of it, or the notion of liberty of choosing certain services, I think direct payment actually pays off better. I think it's the way how we are putting it before the clients and how they are building their confidence in terms of taking up the services. My question would be around 2 things. One is, are we actually being able to do the yearly review of the direct payment services, how it's going and whether there had been delays? I know because of COVID and everything there could be likely delays, but since we are doing it since 2018, how had been the performance? Is it on point, on target? And secondly, in terms of communities, not only age, but also communities, certain communities also are afraid because they would not understand the technicalities of it. Direct payment, often when explained, I've seen, are jargon based, which is scary at times, and because there is a financial side of it and then accountability side of it. So have you had any sort of uptake in certain communities as well, like you have pointed out, the age wise? So these are the main two questions, and the final one will be roughly around the answers. That, do you think that there are other ways or areas we need to focus to maintain the services? Because personally, I think it is a great choice given the option that people have three ways of doing it: partial payment, council looking after it, and absolute liberty. Thank you.
I think on the reviews question, I think we're currently around about 55 to 60% of reviews done annually. So obviously that is it's nowhere near where we need to be. It's probably where most authorities are at, sort of capacity wise, and then we're always trying to sort of prioritize the capacity we have in respect of those people that need reviews. And we've recently reviewed all our sort of management information in this area so that we can best target that resource. But I cannot hand on heart say that everybody has a review every year. Not everybody needs a review every year where sort of care packages are settled, but and we are essentially looking at how we best deploy that resource that we have. I think the question on communities is a really interesting one. I don't have the data to hand. I could come up with some hypotheses around take up, but to be honest, what I'd quite like to do is go away and ask our business intelligence team to do some analysis around direct payment take up by ward, by ethnicity, and essentially to see what that looks like. I've got some theories, but they would only be theories, and I'd rather come back with the data.
Yeah, can I jump in there
yeah.
as well? I absolutely agree. We don't have the refined data, but I absolutely think that's something certainly that we could do. We're certainly looking at improving the information and advice that's on offer actually to people generally in the community, and that's something that's in our work plan in our direct payment improvement working group, and also resetting up the peer support group as well, which again in one of the research projects found was incredibly useful for people because people can share and exchange ideas. And again, we would want those peer support groups to be very reflective of our local communities. And also, you're quite right that sometimes it can be incredibly jargonistic. We've got to make sure that things are written in accessible language, and that's also on our list of improvements that we're seeking to do over the course of the year so that it's accessible information to all.
Councillor Mrs. Nolan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you. And a lot of the questions I had in mind have actually been answered. And thank you, Adrian, for this report. I'm not sure. I think as I was the cabinet member many years ago, and I think direct payments came in during my term of office. And I must admit, I was a little bit sceptical about it because I think certainly the older generation who are on receipt of commission services were very worried about how they were going to manage this. And I think this is the main cause. And I think, Councillor Ahmed, you just mentioned about direct payments jargon, very complicated. It really is for those individuals, and I think they do need to be improved so that it is easy reading for everybody. It really is. Half of it I don't understand, so I'm sure they don't. I think question for you, Adrian, there's about 640 people in receipt of direct payments at the moment. Have many reduced in number since we first started this particular scheme?
I couldn't give you the sort of long-term trend. I think my experience is it's been sort of reasonably static in respect to numbers. It's, as I said, I think during the pandemic we have seen a reduction. Sadly, partly as obviously as a result of deaths, but also as a result of some people actually no longer wanting carers to come into the house, and quite often the people with direct payments will have the lower levels of need, so they might be better able to have those care needs met by family members who've been furloughed, etc., etc., etc. So we've seen that the changes in family dynamics and support networks during the pandemic. that might be a temporary reduction. It might well come back up.
Yeah.
We just, obviously we'll keep an eye on the figures.
Yeah.
But, we don't know with confidence yet.
No, because I say during your previous COVID presentation, you did say that the increased capacity sometimes, or particularly in respect of mental health need, as well as all sorts of other reasons as well. Slightly different question. Those recipients that directly employ a personal assistant, you recommend that they are DBS checked, and obviously I would imagine strongly recommend. I would have thought that would be essential, because if somebody is employing somebody to look after their finances for them and they are particularly vulnerable, it's absolutely vital that that individual is checked. I mean, do we recommend to the recipient that they do this, or is it something that is a requirement as part of their direct payment, that they must get the person that is looking after their financial affairs is DBS checked? Because there is fraud, isn't there, Adrian?
There is. I think the DBS check tends to relate more to the person that's providing the care to the individual rather than the person that's looking after the finances, if you see what I mean.
But even so, anybody perhaps who they advise as an advisor, an advocate, would we recommend that individual, because we know that sometimes these individuals do take advantage of elderly people?
We do, and we would always sort of recommend that people, have those checks, whether being care provided. We obviously do provide facilities for people to have essentially their direct payment accounts managed by a third party who are obviously DBS checked, and some people take that managed service route for their direct payments. But yes, we would always recommend a DBS check, although I would always give the caution that a DBS check doesn't evidence an awful lot with regard to sort of safeguarding. So I think it's also the more general message around being alert and keeping a focus on safeguarding.
And if I may, Chair, just one other question. Obviously, with the pandemic, there are some individuals that haven't been able to use their direct payments for all sorts of reasons. You say because they've had care at home and all sorts of reasons they haven't been able to. I mean, particularly a family I know that they haven't been able to provide care for their son, so they've been doing it themselves, and they're desperately in need of a break. Would you, in that instance, look at their finances, because clearly they probably have more than they should have, and consequently, would you then try and claw that money back?
I think, as ever, it would depend on the individual circumstances. So, I can't say yes or no. It would depend on the circumstances, because obviously that direct payment is given for the care needs of that individual at the time. And if effectively that money hasn't been spent on that care needs, then, as you indicated, Councillor, at some point we would claw that back. But we do realise that obviously families are in quite exceptional circumstances during the pandemic, and we'll try and be sort of more discerning in that decision making, if I can put it that way.
I would hope so. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Ross Hatfield.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add something, but
Yes, Leila. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say to Councillor Nolan that over the last year with the pandemic and just how difficult it has been for people, we have sent out numerous newsletters, and we have taken a much more flexible approach with people in the last year when they're looking for alternative types of support rather than the ones that they were usually using. So we have tried to be flexible. But yes, as Adrian said, at some point we will have to recover unspent monies at some point. But certainly the practice advice to social workers and the frontline staff is to be flexible in the approach when the usual arrangements just haven't been there for people. So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Hatfield.
Yeah, I was just going to say, listening to Adrian say that a number of direct payments had stopped because people didn't want carers in with the pandemic, it just suddenly occurred to me that I was worried that there may be people out there who had stopped their direct payments but actually didn't have the adequate support that they needed at this time, and were actually really struggling. Actually, they really needed this support. I just wondered, when someone does cancel their direct payments, what checks we are putting in place to make sure that they are able to cope without that support, and that we're not leaving them vulnerable and, really in need of assistance that they're not getting.
We would seek to follow that up through the social work team. So the social work would be in contact with the individual to talk about that decision and what, as you're indicating, counsellor, what assurances we can gain that that person is having their needs met, during that period. But yes, it is a concern that has been happening. But equally, people have that option. They always have that option available to them.
Councillor Noor, did you have a question? Or are you telling us that you're going to go and break your fast? Councillor Noor?
Yes, no, just I want to make a point and then I have to leave. If you allow me to make a point about the direct payment, and okay, please, thank you. And I just echoing with the point raised by Councillor Sunil, and I think it's very important that those are in looking after the direct payment side of those are recipient. Adrian was not saying any directly about whether DBS check is something important. My point is that as my legal practice, I know of those are receiving and also taking care of the other relatives as well. There is an incident sometime you can understand this happening. But my understanding is that we as a local authority, we should take due diligence as much possible to make sure that no one taking the advantage of other and then no one is misappropriating the public fund. Those are entitled to receive for their own benefit and for their well-being. So this is my point. And yes, Chair, the second point is that if you allow me to leave for 10 minutes, then it will be much appreciated.
We'll conclude this item and then we'll restart in 8:35. The next item on the agenda, which will be agenda item 7. Councillor Noor, that's fine. You will just conclude this, the recommendations, and then we'll resume back the whole committee at 8:35. Thank you, Councillor. I assume, Councillor Ahmed, you're going as well. That's fine. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Leila, can you just remind me what the recommendations are, please?
Yes, sorry, I just had to turn off my mute button. So
Unfortunately, on
my
this,
report that
yeah, I hate working on screens. I can't flip from one to the other.
I can sit, Chair.
The recommendation is that it's a recommendation notes the content of the report and support provided to people who receive a direct payment. Is that correct?
It's essentially to note the contents of the report, Chair.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay,
Sorry
the note has been noted. Thank you. So we're going to now break.
Turn off your video and your sound, but stay logged into the meeting.
Okay, so we'll see everyone at 8:35. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello, Michael.
Hello there.
Right, it's now 8:35.
Yes.
Hopefully everyone will be joining us.
Yes, here they come.
Hello, Ross. Right.
Hi.
Oh, right. Can I check everyone's back?
I suspect, yes, people are. It's quite hard to know if they're back online or not, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But
Well,
it's usually when the pictures return, of course,
okay.
and let's get the videos on, but we're nearly there.
Not necessarily. People tend to keep their videos off, don't they? Can we move on to agenda item 7 and see if Anempia Palau is available? I'm so sorry, I might have pronounced your wrong incorrectly. Is it Anethia? Anthea?
Anita.
Anita.
Yeah, I think Councillor Coombe is actually going to introduce the report.
Are you, Councillor Coombe?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasant surprise.
Thank you. So basically, this is just a quarterly report about complaints and from the People Directorate. And I think that the explanations that are given in the report are fairly comprehensive. So I'll just leave it open to questions.
Any members?
And good night.
Not so quick. You just got to give us a couple of minutes. Any member? No? No comments from anybody. Oh, Councillor Nolan.
Yes, 'tis I. Part of the Appendix 2, Councillor Coombe, it talks about the education and inclusion bit. And the pandemic also affected the support services such as occupational therapy and speech and language. Why did that happen? Because certainly with something like obviously occupational therapy and speech and language, it's difficult to do it unless you're face to face with somebody. But certainly with regards to admission issues or special educational needs provisions, surely that could be done remotely. So I cannot understand why there was such a lack of it during the pandemic.
All right, I'm going to hand that over to, I think, Colin's on the call.
Oh, is he?
Obviously, and Adrian as well. Because my place in all of this is that I'm the cabinet member whose portfolio includes complaints and customers, and so it comes from the team that works within that department, sort of the overall. So yesterday we were at place, today we're at people, Monday we're at strategy. So, and we'll be back again in October, just so that everybody's got an overview of the volume and the speed at which things are turned around. And so I know that Adrian will be able to answer those questions for you.
And always a pleasure to see you, Councillor Coombe.
I'll comb my hair.
I think in regard to the SEND provision during the pandemic, you're absolutely right, Councillor Nolan. So some of the work that we do can be done remotely, particularly some of our panel arrangements for putting together education, health and care plans, for example. But where it comes to direct provision, that is more tricky during the pandemic period, because certainly services such as occupational therapy and speech and language therapy tend to be face-to-face type services. It's not impossible, but it's harder to provide those services virtually. A number of issues with that. Simply the arrangements for having those meetings with children and parents are just, more difficult. The use of PPE, risk assessments takes time. And I think the other and possibly the bigger issue is, of course, those services relied on staff from the NHS, and many NHS staff were redeployed certainly during the first wave of the pandemic into other settings, and certainly some of the support that was available for children with SEND, physiotherapy, speech and language therapy, those staff were working in other parts of the business, and therefore the plans could not be met, and that generated complaints from some parents.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Chair.
That was very short and sweet, Councillor Coombe. Thank you so much for coming along and presenting this agenda item.
Thank you.
Right, moving on to agenda item 8, future meetings. The next meeting is on the 6th of July. I thought, could we bring it forward, Adrian, to June?
Can I interject? I think that'd be quite difficult to do because there are obviously other committees, and on evenings we have trouble moving meetings as it is really. But
okay, one of the things, I mean, obviously, if we can take it outside the meeting between Adrian and yourself, Michael, and anyone else that needs to be involved, but we certainly need to look at maybe having our full quota of meetings, because now that we're coming out of lockdown, I think we need to be looking and scrutinizing a lot more of the services, maybe face to face rather than virtually. And I think on that note, I think we need to open up a discussion with members as to future agenda items. If I may kickstart perhaps first, that I think we have touched on certain areas in previous meetings on youth service provision as well as young carers, and I think it would be helpful going forward that we actually arrange with officer support and help visiting some of these sites, as well as having reports presented to the committee. I think it would help to look at the services being delivered firsthand, and as well as scrutinizing them on paper. So youth service provision is one that I'd like to add to the work plan, and also young carers is another item. I have a few others, but I'm going to open it up to other members, and then because I think another area that I'm very, very keen on, I know Councillor Gomez is very interested in, is the disability charter. What we need to be doing is looking at what we're doing and what's happening, and looking at things within that charter, and scrutinizing the services that we're actually facilitating. So I'll open it up to members. Can I call in Councillor Ahmed first?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to raise one thing. I remember some time back we actually formulated a task and finish group of youth services. If that can be proceed, that will be helpful. I think we can clearly bind the things and look at the wider impact. And secondly, I would like to have special focus on violence against women. since it has doubled, and we have had significant reports everywhere that it is going to be changing once the lockdown's over, and the perpetrators and the victims will be coming into public spaces, than how we are going to tackle things. So it will be good to look at our services and revisit how we're going to do it.
On that note, on domestic violence, Adrian, I understand that there is a project that's just been published by social workers on domestic violence. Is that right?
There's quite a lot of activity happening in that field at the moment. I suppose there are two things that key things that are happening. We've had a review of the council's arrangements for domestic responding to domestic abuse. That's been undertaken by Safer Lives, a national charity expert in this field. Right. They should be reporting to us very soon. Right. And so, you know, that report could well come to this meeting for your views. I think, you know, equally Place Scrutiny through their community safety angle might want, but you know, I'm sure we can sort that out. I think I'm trying to think what I'm not sure what the.
I could be helpful, maybe.
Oh. I will defer to Councillor Norman.
I was thinking of the project we did using virtual reality with perpetrators, and the evaluation that's just been done on that. That might be very useful.
Helpful. Yes.
Yes, we do indeed have that evaluation has just been published, so we could bring that to the committee.
That would be helpful. That would be helpful. Councillor Hatfield.
I was just going to say, I'd certainly welcome youth centres and youth provision being looked at, partly because with most of them being closed during the pandemic, what the impact has been on those users because they haven't been having a service, and whether we need to do something to deal with that, but also to look at youth provision generally, because a lot of things like the recent example with Loxford Youth Centre, where I'm not exactly 100% certain what's happened with it and what the future is there. And, you know, it would be nice to just look into this area in a bit more detail. So I strongly support that.
Good. Okay. Councillor Mrs. Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I kind of linking with what Ross has just said about youth, and what Adrian mentioned earlier on about the increase in mental health with young people. So I think that could be kind of linked in with youth in general, because obviously with the schools back, and I noticed that in the COVID report, there's a huge increase in young people coming forward with concerns, and also with issues regarding domestic violence as well. And the other issue I would like to draw to your attention was the issue of dementia, because I think that's one of these hidden things which I think we're going to see an awful lot of increase now that we're coming back to a little bit more normality now. So I think that needs to be looked at, and possibly linked with safeguarding vulnerable adults, which I notice is on the list there as well. So possibly something like that, but certainly with relation to youth, with mental health, domestic violence and so on, and issues which could be linked all together with, and if we are going to lose provision for young people in the borough, I mean, you know, there was a huge outcry when the thought of Fairlock Sailing Centre was going to close, because it's one of the very few places that young people can go to. So there was a huge petition and a huge outcry about that. Unfortunately enough, it's been reopened. So we do need to look at the youth in the borough and young people. They are our future. So thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Adrian.
I think, Chair, as a suggestion, obviously the committee did, you say, commence a member-led review. We could bring a paper to your next meeting, which is almost a position statement on youth services. This is the current youth service offer in the borough. This is what's happening. This is where it's happening. These are sort of the issues. These are the experience and demand. So in many ways, just to give you the facts around the provision and the current issues to inform that member-led review maybe going forward.
I think we would added to which that's very helpful. Yes, please. But added to which, I think we need to look at actually doing some visits as well. So if you and your team could sort of maybe you know, support the committee in identifying to help look at the practice as well that's in place, please?
Yeah, certainly. We'll liaise with Michael to get that arranged.
Okay. Michael, did you note the disability charter?
Yes, I have that as a possibility.
Okay, great.
And the others as well. What I'll do,
Yeah.
I'll go away and do some evaluation around those to see which of those might deliver the best kind of best outcome. Really, it's worth deliver some improvements.
I think some of the things that Councillor Nolan was saying would fit in. Once we've looked at the charter, disability charter, there may be things that lots of things that hang under it. I know Councillor Gourmet. Councillor Gourmet, do you want to bring in the thing that you were interested in pursuing? Councillor Gourmet?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. Under the Disability Charter, I was very interested to look at the motor neuron disease. And thanks, Adrian, for coming back to me on this. That was helpful. That would be interesting because I have had the association write to me asking for figures and how quick, and a report on how quickly we respond to applications for housing adaptations for those who are in the latter part of their lives. So I would be grateful to have a closer look at this. And Chair, if you thought it would be appropriate to have somebody come and give us a presentation from the association.
Is that okay? Right. Any other member? Any cabinet members? Councillor Norman and Councillor Santos. Do you have any feedback?
I was just thinking, Chair. I mean, I think it's a really good suggestion to do visits to actually see the provision of the services on the ground.
Yeah.
But I wonder if when you're looking at youth and young people, that you might maybe consider inviting a couple of young people to your meeting to talk to you about it.
Absolutely, that's an excellent suggestion, Councillor Norman.
Oh, and the other thing, before I go, maybe I could just put in a plug for the UNICEF child-friendly training that's coming up this month, and really recommend it to all members to sign up for it, because it's absolutely excellent training. And if you're interested in young people and children's rights, I think you'll really enjoy it. And as I say, it's very worthwhile. So I just
when is it?
A plug for that.
What date is it?
There's 2 dates.
I'll send links if you like to.
Yes,
Well,
Michael.
The links come out tonight. The team invites have come out tonight, so that's why I thought it would be useful to just remind you of it, so you can all sign up. I've actually done it, and I know a lot of our officers have done it as well, so I think it's important that members join in too.
Yes. No, that's thank you for that. Thank you for the prompt. Any other member? No? Well, I have nothing further to, there's no other urgent agenda items, so I will be closing the meeting at 8:55.
Marvellous.
All right then. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you,
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks. Good night.